We turned on your tap, what happens? Out comes water. Crystal clear, odorless, tasteless. Most of us take this for granted, but it's an incredible accomplishment of science, technology, and public works, and it didn't happen overnight. Our relationship with water is complicated. We need it to survive. But for most of history, water was a dangerous lover. Floods could wipe out villages, droughts could kill livestock, and when water was used for drinking and cleaning, it often led to disease. One of humanity's greatest breakthroughs came quietly. We call it boiling water. It doesn't sound like much, but this one simple technique has saved millions of lives. It's a story you won't learn anywhere else. What if you couldn't trust your water? Do you ever stop and think about where your water comes from? Probably not. But for most of human history, this question was a matter of life and death. Picture yourself back in time. You're thirsty. You walk to a nearby river, scoop up a handful of water, and drink. But within hours, you're sick. Nausea, fever, and maybe death. This was daily life for our ancestors. For thousands of years, water was both a source of life and silent death. For most of history, water was used for everything. When water sat stagnant in open containers or traveled through open channels, it picked up contamination from sewage animals or decomposing plants. This meant the water supply could never be pure. When you see a sparkling waterfall, can you see bacteria, viruses, or other microorganisms? Of course not. But these organisms were lurking in nature's pristine waters. Back then, there was no way to tell if your water was clean. Before the 1800s, most people in the world didn't know what caused these diseases. But anyone who lived near a river knew that if you drank from it, you might die. So everyone had to make a choice. Should they trust the water? This decision shaped daily life. Families might spend all day collecting water, going far away to ensure their supply was safe. You might imagine that ancient people would choose the cleanest water source, but that wasn't always the case. People were often unaware of the real danger. A beautiful lake or fast-flowing river might be the deadliest source of water. Today, we know that microorganisms live in lakes and rivers. But back then, these sources were seen as safer than stagnant pools or wells. Pools and wells might have seemed like the obvious choice. After all, they held water close to the ground, so they must be clean, right? Wrong wells in particular were often contaminated by animal droppings and human waste seeping in from above. In fact, cholera outbreaks in the 1800s could be traced back to infected wells. Not every culture had access to fresh surface water or wells. Then there were other options, like rainwater harvesting. But even that came with its own set of problems. Rainwater could collect on dirty surfaces, pick up contaminants, or become a breeding ground for mosquitoes. Clean water was a constant gamble. Every source had its own risks. The odds of dying from contaminated water were high, so families had to take steps to protect themselves. Enter boiling. Before modern science, people had their senses and experience to guide them. Slowly, people began to notice patterns. When water was boiled, something changed. Whatever was making people sick seemed to disappear when water reached a rolling boil, around 100 degrees Celsius or 212 degrees Fahrenheit. But nobody knew exactly what that thing was or how it worked. It wasn't a scientist in a lab. It was everyday people over hundreds or thousands of years who discovered this life-saving technique. To figure out the history of boiling water, we have to look at two separate times. One is the timeline of how humans learned to use fire. The other is the timeline of how they developed ceramic or metal pots. Using fire to cook meat made our ancestors healthier and smarter. Cooking kills harmful bacteria and parasites. It makes food easier to digest. And cooked brains allow more nutrients to be absorbed. Scientists think these benefits helped our ancestors develop larger brains, leading to more intelligence and social skills. This was probably a slow process that happened gradually over hundreds of generations. But when it comes to putting that fire to use with water, we can look at two specific examples. In China, evidence suggests that boiling water was already common by 2000 BC. The Jiahu people in China domesticated pigs and raised cattle. This created more opportunities for exposure to deadly diseases. As a result, they needed more ways to purify their food and water. Archaeologists found pieces of pottery and animal bones from the Jiahu site. These fragments show signs of being heated to temperatures as high as 960 degrees Celsius or 1700 degrees Fahrenheit. This means they could have boiled water, killed pathogens in meat, and prevented bacterial growth in food and drink. The second example we can look at is ancient Mesopotamia. Today, we know the area as the Fertile Crescent, one of the oldest cradles of civilization. Here people domesticated wheat and barley and kept animals like sheep and goats. Again, this brought more opportunities for exposure to diseases. Analysis of ancient fragments from Mesopotamia shows that they also learned to boil water. Their kilns fired clay to temperatures above 1000 degrees Celsius or 1800 degrees Fahrenheit. These high temperatures could have killed off disease-causing microorganisms in water. But even after discovering this life-saving technique, it wasn't a smooth journey. The rise and fall of civilizations. Across the globe, ancient civilizations figured out that boiling water made it safer to drink. But throughout history, progress was constantly lost to war, famine, and natural disaster. Ancient Egyptian society flourished along the Nile River. The Egyptians harnessed the river's water for drinking and farming, but every year they faced rising floodwaters that threatened their homes and crops. To cope with these floods, the Egyptians built canals and reservoirs. Over time, these structures led to waterborne diseases, because they provided the perfect place for contaminants to grow. For example, in 1737, a severe cholera epidemic hit Cairo. This crisis led to massive social upheaval, including protests against the government. These events played a part in the end of the country's Mamluk dynasty. Across the world in Greece, Athens was known for its advanced water system. Homes were connected to underground pipes that brought water from distant springs. This gave citizens easy access to clean water, but it wasn't enough to prevent epidemics. During the Peloponnesian War between Athens and Sparta, contaminated water likely played a role in spreading disease. The war weakened Athens and left it vulnerable to a devastating plague that killed thousands. Boiling water didn't wipe out every threat from contaminated water, but it did save countless lives. The dark side of progress. By the Industrial Revolution, cities were crowded, the water supply was over, sewage systems were lacking, and outbreaks of cholera, typhoid, and dysentery were common. Take the Broad Street pump in London. It was a public water pump that supplied around 500 people with drinking water. In 1854, an outbreak of cholera killed hundreds of people in London. Dr. John Snow traced the source of the outbreak back to this single water pump. His discovery suggested that the water supply was contaminated, but he couldn't prove it without microscopes. This idea was controversial at the time because it went against the popular belief that cholera was spread through the air. Years later, we know that Snow was right. The Broad Street pump had been contaminated by sewage from an outhouse nearby. This outbreak in Snow's investigation helped prove that boiling water could kill disease-causing organisms. Around the same time, Louis Pasteur's germ theory in France was showing similar results. Pasteur showed that heating liquids to a specific temperature could destroy the organisms that spoiled them. This process came to be known as pasteurization. At first it was used to keep wine and milk from spoiling. Later, the process was applied to water treatment. By the early 1900s, major cities like Paris and Berlin began boiling or chlorinating their water supplies. This saved countless lives and helped lower death rates from contaminated water. Clean water became a basic human right. Throughout the 20th century, governments around the world worked to provide clean water and adequate sewage systems for their citizens. New technologies like water filtration and pipes helped bring clean water to remote places, but even now, boiling water remains one of the best ways to remove dangerous bacteria from water. And around the world, people are still fighting for access to clean water. Does it feel normal to you? When you turn on your tap, do you think about the history behind your water? The water that flows into your home may have traveled through miles of pipes, passed through filters, and even been treated with chlorine. But it all started with one simple technique: boiling water. It's hard to overstate the impact of this discovery. Boiling water has saved millions of lives and allowed billions more to thrive. It allowed our ancestors to explore the world, build great civilizations, and push the boundaries of knowledge. But boiling water isn't just science. It's human resilience. A simple act that changed history and continues to save lives. If you enjoyed this episode, hit the like button, follow for more, and subscribe for weekly drops of ancient wisdom and forgotten truths. This is How to Daily Me, where we uncover the genius in the everyday. See you next time.